Good morning and welcome to this week's Downtown Download. We'll wait a few minutes as our guests join and we will begin in 1 minute. And see the numbers. Just in 1 minute, we will join. Good morning and welcome to this week's Downtown Download. I'm Shalonda Stokes, President of Downtown Partnership. I have the pleasure of co-hosting this with Councilman Eric Costello, and we have some phenomenal guests with us today. Before we get to who we have, I'd like to just give a few updates on what's happening at Downtown Partnership. I'll then transition it to Councilman Costello. He'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the city, and then we'll go right into a conversation with our guests. We do have, would like to receive audience questions, so there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We ask that you please enter your questions as soon as you have them, and we'll get to them towards the end of the show. So please please put your questions in the Q&A box below. But just to give you a little bit on what's happening in downtown and with Downtown Partnership, we have a number of events and activities coming out. One of them is Restaurant Week. I know you're all familiar with Restaurant Week. It's coming back different this year. I like to say it's going to be even better and more inclusive this year. It's taking place from July 24th through August 2nd. So make sure that you get locked and loaded to participate. What's different this year is it takes the form of not just indoor dining, but it's outdoor dining, it's curbside, it's whatever, however you want to engage, support, try new restaurants, we want you to do that. And so we're making it easy. We also have an expanding what's called our parklet. And so I don't know if you all are familiar with the parklet. If you look on screen, you can see to the right, it's a structure that allows for outdoor seating and expanded seating. It will, for our restaurants along Charles Street, give them some additional capacity. What you can see there is our summer schedule. So we'll be at Cad's Bar, Home Slice, Mick O'Shea's, and the Civil, and the dates are included on there. And so we're going from July 14th, which starts tomorrow. Is that today? Starts today, right? My days are all getting mixed up, but I think we'll be ready tomorrow with all of those things on there going all the way through September 8th. So please don't miss it. Even come out to support the restaurants and to, have a seat in the outdoors with the parklet. So we want to make sure you do that. And then on July 24th, there's a new addition that Downtown Partnership announced during Juneteenth. In celebration and in recognition of our Black businesses, we've created what's called Black Business Friday. So the fourth Friday of every month, so it starts on the 24th of this month for July, August, and September. We're going to celebrate, honor, recognize, help drive revenue to some Black businesses that are in our city. And this isn't just for Black businesses or Black, white, green, and different. It is a celebration. So we want to make sure that everybody comes out to celebrate. Now we are limiting it. And so part of it, to make sure that it's social distancing, it is limited to 200 people in there to make sure we have ample space and all of that. And so we encourage you to register. All of that is available on our website, godowntownbaltimore.com. Our teams are out cleaning as they are. I don't know if people saw, I had an opportunity to clean with the team. And so that was an experience in there. We're working closely with DPW on some things. And so please stay tuned. I know our team in the city is really committed to getting over the COVID hump and making sure we get all of our teams back up and ready and keeping our city clean and safe. So with that, Councilman, I think it's an excellent transition to what you bring. So Councilman Costello, if you would give us a few updates on the city and then take us into, if you bring it back to me, I'll introduce our guest today.
Thanks so much, Shalonda. I have two updates I wanted to share. One, many of you may have heard parking meters went back into effect yesterday. So parking enforcement, what is on the table before was handicap spaces, blocking fire hydrants, and blocking the public right of way. That would mean parking in a bus lane, blocking an ADA ramp at a corner. Added back to that is the enforcement of parking meters. So you will see parking enforcement officers start to issue citations for meters. So everyone on the call, please share that information with your respective constituencies to help get the word out there. Other items that are not being enforced include peak hour restrictions and residential permit parking, or RPP. The second thing, I'd like to just remind everyone of the need to follow CDC guidelines. What we're seeing across the city are a number of restaurants that have had to close down because they've had a positive COVID test, whether it be an employee or a customer. So please just be sure to make sure you're wearing that mask in public and you're following 6 feet of social distancing. Make sure that you're frequently cleaning your hands with soap and warm water, or using a alcohol-based hand sanitizer. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Shalonda.
So thank you so much for keeping us in the loop. Today is a little bit different as we talk about Downtown Download. The focus of Downtown Download has been on COVID-19. We've had a number of guests to talk about what's happening from PPP on out. Today, we really want to talk about the resurgence and recovery of that. And so there's a column, a recent City Lab column, where the urbanist Richard Florida wrote, "If the urban unrest of the late 1960s seemed to signal the death and decay of cities, the urban unrest of today signals their resurgence and holds within it seeds of their progressive remaking. Not only are cities on the upswing, we are in the early stages of a new wave of urban policy innovation, which is occurring from the bottom up in cities, our true laboratories of democracy." So our two guests this morning are directly involved in Baltimore's policy innovation, or to put it another way, they're the scientists in our laboratories of democracy. Even before Councilman Costello and I became co-chairs of the Mayor, a Small Business Recovery Task Force, we both work regularly with Colin Tarbert on economic development. He's the president and CEO of the Baltimore Development Corporation, or BDC as they call it, which is Baltimore's economic development agency. He and his team are responsible for retaining and attracting businesses, expanding job opportunities for city residents, and increasing investment across the cities and neighborhoods. And after we talk to Colin, we'll move from BDC to the NDC. You know, we like these acronyms in here, the Neighborhood Design Center. And so we're also happy to have Jennifer Goold, who is the Neighborhood Design Center of Maryland's executive director for both Baltimore and Prince George's County offices. She's been with the NDC since 2012, and after more than a decade, working in cultural resource management, historic preservation, development, and planning. Jennifer has been involved in many of the city's largest historic building rehabilitations, including the American Can Company, Silo Point, and Tide Point. Colin and Jennifer, welcome you both. And Councilman, you can take it away.
Thank you, Shalonda, and Colin and Jennifer, thanks so much for being with us this morning. We're really excited about this episode. Colin, I want to start with you. As Shalonda just mentioned, Baltimore Development Corporation, or BDC, is normally tasked with business attraction and retention. Now, what you're doing right now is really more like life support for some of the small businesses. Can you tell us a little bit about what you and the city have been working on to help support small businesses and prevent the shutdown of more of them?
Yeah, sure. Before I answer your question, I just want to say thank you to Shalonda and to yourself, Councilman, for having me on today. And I enjoyed Shalonda's intro. I've been called many things, but a scientist is not one. So I'll take that one as a new name. So thank you. But yeah, the last couple months have obviously been, I think, very stressful and uncertain for everyone. But in particular, our small businesses. And so we've really been in response mode. And in some degrees, we're still in response mode, trying to help our small businesses get through this period of uncertainty. And we've been working since early March to try to figure out how best to respond, what our small businesses need, and then figure out how to get them resources. So one of the initial efforts that we launched through BDC was through our Made in Baltimore program. Shout out to Andy Cook, who did a great job in working with our local manufacturers and local makers to ramp up their response to the pandemic and to help others. So since the beginning, we issued initially a $50,000 grant because we knew that businesses needed to purchase some equipment to increase their production and also hire some additional staff. And that was so successful that we worked with both of you, the mayor's task force, to get an additional $500,000 of funding from Mayor Young to expand that program. And so we've helped about 19 different manufacturers and makers in the city. To date, I think we've done over 84,000 face masks, 30,000 face shields, and 33,000 gallons of hand sanitizer made right here in the city with small businesses. So those are really exciting numbers. And so it's been as much about BDC's response as it has been our entrepreneurial community. So that's been an exciting project and program for us to work on. We also have 3 other programs that we're working on, one of which I'm going to let Jennifer talk about, which is the Design for Distancing. It's the headline here today. To touch on the other 2, one is the Small Business Assistance Network, and that's something that BDC was fortunate enough to be selected to help coordinate. But we're working with 18 other community partners. About 8 are technical advisory organizations. So we're working with the Baltimore City Black Chamber of Commerce. We're working with Morgan State University to provide technical assistance to small businesses to work through a lot of these programs, both the federal, the state, and the city level, as well as community partners that are on the ground that have relationships with small businesses that might not necessarily approach BDC or know who we are. And so that's been a really great way to expand our communication and network. And something that I think came together relatively quickly for Baltimore community. Sometimes we like to stay in our silos and do our own thing. And just kudos to all the stakeholders and team members that came together to support that initiative. And hopefully that's something that we can keep going as we move forward to help our small business community. And then the other was the Small Business Assistance Grant Program that we launched, again, with the Mayor's Task Force assistance and Mayor Young's commitment. We had $3.5 million to provide to businesses. And so I can talk a little bit about how we did that and the results, but that's been really key to a lot of small businesses that otherwise wouldn't have received any funding, to keep them open, to keep them alive, and give them hope to make it through. So.
Thanks, Colin. And, looking at all of the different things that you just mentioned, and I know there's some other things going on, it seems like the mayor, along with BDC, have really put together a robust program of recovery to try and be as creative as possible to help our small businesses. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in other cities as the city looked at what's going on in terms of developing our playbook for how to deal with this?
Sure. And Baltimore has been fortunate through some of the networks that I'm involved in. I've actually participated in, of course, Zoom calls, literally all across the world. So Montreal, Turin, Italy, shared best practices globally with the program that we're involved with. So that's been really fascinating to see, not just what's happening in the US or on the East Coast, but what's happening globally. Everyone's in a very different situation. But we're also part of a Bloomberg philanthropies cohort, a COVID response. And so that's given us some resources, but also given us some collaboration with other cities. In particular, we've had a couple conversations with Atlanta to see what they're doing. And then yesterday I was on a Pew Charitable's Trust conversation with a handful of cities, including our neighbor Philadelphia, to hear what they're doing. And I would actually say Baltimore's fared pretty well. I think that we might not necessarily have as much resources as some of the other cities in terms of dollar amount, but one of the things that we did in particular with the grant assistance program was that we waited. And so there was a bit of frustration, I think, at BDC because we were so eager to get out there and help. But we wanted to see, what the federal government was going to roll out in terms of their small business administration programs, the EIDL and the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. Um, and that gave us a little bit more insight as to what our small businesses really needed. And so when we launched that grant program, we made a intentional decision to not make it first come, first serve, because we saw that the money went very quickly, and it also went to businesses that might be more connected or have resources that others didn't. And so we gave it about a 2-week period to allow for businesses to understand the program, to get their paperwork in place. If they needed assistance with tax forms or other documentation, we had the technical assistance network that I mentioned to give everyone a fair shot. And then we also prioritized it to make sure that we were helping the businesses that were most vulnerable, businesses that weren't eligible for some of the federal programs. And I think the results have been, very positive in terms of what we were doing. So in some ways, we've shared those two best practices, the network and also the grant assistance program. And I think in some ways have been able to lead. I'd also say that because of the mayor's leadership, and I think the consistent message from the state government, we're not seeing what other cities are seeing, particularly now in the South with the reopening and the reclosing. We've been fairly steady and I think, conservative in our approach and prioritizing public health. And I think in the long run, that's really going to help our economy come back in a way that's more sustainable. And then I would also say that the other cities that we're talking to had significantly more violence associated with the racial tensions and the protests, whereas Baltimore, I think we were really, we handled that in a way that was really admirable. I think, there were a tremendous amount of protest and freedom of speech, but done in a way I think that was really productive. And we didn't see the type of, unrest that we saw in 2015 with Freddie Gray. I think as a city, we had gone through that pain. And so this time it was a much more peaceful protest for change, whereas other cities are grappling with small businesses that had been tremendously affected by damage to their business, looting, etc. Fortunately, Baltimore didn't have that recently. So in some ways, we positioned, I think, fairly well, hopefully for recovery.
Thanks, Colin. And I know, Shalonda, that's one of the things that we've talked about, just how equitable the program is that the city was able to put in place. Keep in mind that, a lot of the complaints and concerns that we received, these funds dried up as soon as we announced them. So really appreciate everything that the mayor and that you and your team at BDC did, Colin. I want to shift a little bit, and I was hoping you could talk to me a little bit about how you're monitoring progress. What does success look like during the middle of a pandemic? How is BDC measuring that and looking at that?
Yeah, well, success has sort of changed, I think, week to week in terms of what our priorities are. I'd say now that we've sort of entered into, I think we've gone through a response, but I think we are transitioning now into recovery, although we're still trying to help some businesses that are struggling. I think for us, to kind of touch on the equity piece, that's been something that's been at the forefront of our response and how we've thought through that. And that really actually started at the beginning of the pandemic, even before we saw some of the tragedy across our country in terms of race relations and police brutality, et cetera. And so some of the measures, we were taking a very analytical approach to our results, and we're also going to be very transparent about those results. And so in terms of the grant program in particular, we got just under about 600 requests. And of that, we're probably going to provide about 350 grants, simply because we just didn't have the amount of funding that, of course, we would like. But it's just obviously a significant amount of funding to be able to help more than half of the businesses that applied. But in terms of the recipients, 70% of the businesses that are going to receive funds are minority-owned businesses. Over 60% are women-owned businesses, and over 60% are owned by city residents. So, we were very thoughtful in terms of helping, local women-owned, minority-owned businesses, people who have invested here for many years and are part of the community. And of the 350 plus businesses that we're able to assist, about half had not received any other types of funding, either state or federal. So this is literally their lifeline to making it through the pandemic. Of course, we're going to try to help them with PPP that reopened, recently, and the SBA has reopened their disaster loan program and changed some of the requirements. But that's significant, and so it's both a good story in that we're able to help with the mayor's assistance, businesses that would have been left out of the recovery. At the same time, it's also sort of a question as to why are so many businesses being left out of these other programs, and how do we work on that from a systemic standpoint. And so that's something that we need to drill down and figure out what's causing that and how we might be able to fix it. So I think to answer your question, I think success is recovery for everybody. And I think we've been through these periods before where there's winners and there's losers, certainly industries that are more affected by this pandemic. But our goal here at BDC is to really help everyone across the board to make it through and hopefully come out stronger.
Thank you. Colin, I'm going to put you on the hot seat real quick.
Okay.
With the exception of a significant infusion of funding, one thing off the top of your head that would be helpful to add to BDC's business assistance toolbox?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think because we don't know what the future is going to hold, a crystal ball would be awesome, but that's probably not something that's real. I would say one thing that we've struggled with and that we haven't taken advantage of, just in total candor, is the CARES Act funding with EDA. So there was some funding that was rolled out for small business loans, and there's sort of two issues that we haven't figured out, and we've had a lot of discussions internally. One is small businesses don't really want or need loans right now. They're actually very concerned about taking on additional debt, as you might expect. And then the other piece is sort of navigating the federal process and the amount of paperwork and response that's needed to maintain those grants. They have a very long grant period, a lot of reporting, and frankly, it's somewhat cumbersome money. So that's to one of the earlier questions about what we can learn from other cities. They are taking advantage of some of those loan funds. I know they have concerns about being able to get it out on the street because businesses are hesitant to take on debt if they're not, one of the growing sectors, which we do have growing sectors, of course, during the pandemic, but I think more businesses are hurting than succeeding. And so I think if I had someone that really understood how to use that money and could prepare grants and it was easy and streamlined, that would be something that could be really helpful to our toolkit, or making it a little bit easier and converting some of those dollars into grants to keep us through the end of the year would be awesome.
All right, Colin, let's shift over to the Design for Distancing project. Whose idea was that, and how did you end up partnering with Jennifer from the Neighborhood Design Center?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're so fortunate to have Jennifer and the NDC team as a partner. They've been working literally around the clock to get this, keep it on schedule, which is a very tight schedule, as Jennifer and her team knows. So it actually came out of a conversation where we were obviously seeing other cities readapt their public right-of-ways and start to close streets and give restaurants additional space for outdoor dining. So, and the idea of parklets certainly isn't a new concept. The city's Department of Transportation has a parklet program, and for many years, people have been looking for ways to pedestrianize our streets and better utilize them. So, but it came as part of I mentioned a little bit about the Bloomberg COVID-19 cohort. And so I was having a conversation with one of the Bloomberg leads about this concept of being able to provide more space for our commercial districts, which obviously in Baltimore, in an urban area, the sidewalks can be quite narrow. The restaurants have, very little outdoor sidewalk space. And so from a practical standpoint, it seemed like this would make a lot of sense. Also, I studied architecture in school, so never practiced. So I'm kind of like a wannabe, designer, much to probably Jennifer's chagrin. But and so in my mind, it was like, hey, this could be really fun. I needed something exciting to work on besides just grant programs. And so in a conversation with Bloomberg, they said, well, we fund NDC as well. They're a partner. You should connect with Jennifer. Got us connected. And then that same contact also connected us with our other partner, which is the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. And so we were able to put together, I think, an excellent team of experts, both in design and public health. And then, of course, BDC team here helping to project manage it and move it forward. So that was really how it all kind of came together in a very short period of time, turned it around, and NDC was off to the races and has made a tremendous amount of progress.
Thanks, Colin. Jennifer, turning to you. So you get this call from Colin at BDC. What's the first thing that's running through your mind? How do you begin to scale up a program like this that aims to rapidly change and physically reshape the outdoor space in our city?
Thanks for having me today, Councilman Costello, Ms. Stokes. I think that these are topics that have been on everybody's mind at NDC and in the public interest design field for at least as long as I've worked in it. So it's not exactly, it's something we've hoped to be able to bring and have more in Baltimore. Although certainly not in this context, but certainly it was something that our team is already well trained to be able to conceive and implement. The time frame, obviously, to be able to support our small business community in a urgent and immediate way, created a time frame that what is quite unusual. But I think that everybody is in both our team, BDC's team, and the design field in the Baltimore and national context as a whole, they're quite passionate about supporting the human experience in our cities. And so having something when we're all feeling anxious and the urgency of the situation, we're all, completely ready to dive in and apply our full selves to coming up with exciting solutions.
Thank you. And talk to me a little bit about talk to us a little bit about the criteria that was used for selecting neighborhoods and who might be eligible for this program.
Sure. We were really, BDC took the lead on defining which districts would participate or be offered the opportunity to participate. And it consists of Baltimore's Main Streets districts, current and former, as well as what's known as RBDLs, which is a zoning designation for retail business districts that encompasses the majority of Baltimore's small business districts. So really those street-oriented, historic retail districts that support Baltimore's neighborhoods across the city.
So the project for public spaces has what it calls the Power 10. This is an idea or a concept that a public can thrive only when users have a range of 10 or more reasons to be there. Those things could be outdoor seating, music, dining, cool architecture, playground equipment, etc. And the call for designers to work with our neighborhoods, tell us some of the things that NDC was looking for.
Sure. So I think one of the most exciting things about this program, and I really give Colin credit for the idea, was to do it as a two-part program. In the first part of the program, we did a global call for design concepts. We put together a really robust public health, design, small business team to develop what's called a design brief, basically the constraints and solutions types that we were looking for from designers, and then open that up as in a competition format for people to do quick sketches coming up with their solutions for bringing our small business community out into the public realm so that we could safely, whether it be eat a meal, wait for our haircut, wait for our laundry to dry, queue for the market. All the current information is showing that we're much safer out of doors while doing those things rather than in confined interior environments. So really thinking about opening that to the entire world of designers to come up with great ideas. And so, as you mentioned, Project for Public Space, they have, kind of America's longest history probably in doing research in terms of what people love about being out and socializing in cities. And really one of the main things that people love is to have a very information-rich environment, and one that involves a lot of other people. The main thing people like to look at is actually other people. And so actually bringing things out to the street has a huge advantage from that perspective. If everybody's behind a wall in their own individual restaurant or store, that brings that human context only to those that have the means to participate from a consumer perspective. And so when we bring all the people that are consuming our wonderful goods and services out into the public realm, other people can get the benefits of the human experience while out of doors, which is healthier for them right now. And so, really thinking about how our small business districts are primarily historic business districts. So they already have a lot of that architectural beauty that people really enjoy. People also really enjoy kind of these small blocks in street front with lots of information in terms of signage and storefront windows. And so now adding also things like tables out of doors, benches, additional greenery, additional people walking, really brings that power of 10 to our retail business district context. I think people will find that even post-COVID, that they enjoy being in our small business districts even more now that more things are happening out of doors.
Thanks, Jennifer. As I'm sure you've frequently heard a million times over, Baltimore City is a city of neighborhoods. We have nearly 300 unique neighborhoods. Every single neighborhood is different. Part of the work that NDC is doing is engaging directly with our communities, 15 or 20 some odd neighborhoods that you mentioned that represent a very diverse cross-section of what our city has to offer, whether it's Market Center downtown, whether it's Pennsylvania Avenue, Main Street, Federal Hill, et cetera. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you're working to take all of those different ideas from different areas, and you've got to work with each neighborhood separately in terms of what's the best fit for their neighborhood? How do you do that work and build consensus around these ideas?
Sure. So, that's definitely NDC's area of expertise. And I think, why we were brought to the table. We have a 15-year history of working collaboratively with neighborhood initiated projects to bring investment to our low and moderate income communities, as well as developing those processes that really put the community's wants and needs at the fore as the beginning point of a conversation, not as the midpoint or the input point. They really drive what they need. And we're there to interpret that within the funding and regulation context so that we're directly meeting those community needs through design and implementation. So, it really starts with listening and then scaling the project appropriately to meet those needs. So, I think there's a wide variety of what each community feels like they could really use to support their small business context. And, at the scale that we're doing this, it's often at the a few businesses to a block to a portion of a corridor, and really finding that right space where both the appetite of the small business community, the level of service that we're able to provide to the community through the project, as well as the physical context to really support safely support people being out of doors, and finding that that perfect location and the range of businesses that it could serve is kind of this jumping off point, and then bringing, you know, Baltimore's most talented makers and thinkers and designers to that community context to say, okay, if this is the community's want and need, this is the budget, these are the types of businesses we're going to be serving in that context, what can we do to really allow people to be comfortable, get the things that they want and need during this time, and support that small business in increasing and supporting their capacity so that they can succeed. And doing that quickly but customized. I mean, typically NDC, you know, will support a community in how long it takes to bring everybody to consensus. I think in this, where it needs to be very happen quickly, it's really finding that right context where consensus already exists, and supporting it moving forward, and then sharing that information with everybody else so that they can also take advantage.
Thanks, Jennifer. One of the things that I found most interesting about this Design for Distancing program, and I know Shalonda and I have spent a lot of time talking with Colin about it, is the development of the design manual. As you mentioned, there's only a certain number of neighborhoods that are formally in the program where we have a high density of ground floor retail and small businesses. But we know that we have clusters of 3 or 4 businesses here or there on one block throughout the city. Can you talk to us a little bit about that design manual and how important of a tool that's going to be for those other businesses outside of these Main Street areas?
Sure. So, you know, as we mentioned, we've really done this at 2 different scales. One, providing a guidebook that allows anybody in Baltimore or in the world really who's running a small business to think about how to move some of their capacity to the public space outside their business, or even look at neighboring areas where they could partner with other businesses to move more practices outdoors. And then putting those concepts into practice in several of our specific districts. But really the design brief was developed to support coming up with solutions that could be done on a DIY scale, and that you could take elements from the designs or the full design, depending on your access to resources, and move those things forward to allow you to occupy the public space adjacent to your business for those businesses. And so, you know, it's really meant to support the concepts of how to move part of your business out of doors, not to prescribe the materials or the process that you would need to undertake in your particular situation. So, you know, whether you're working with just the tables and umbrellas you might already have inside, and moving that out to a protected space in adjacent parking areas or vacant lots or your sidewalk, all the way up to partnering with your local business district to take over a whole, say, parking lot or vacant space. We really were thinking more about the spatial concepts and the types of experiences that would allow people to conduct and consume safely, rather than a prescribed materials solution.
I think that's going to be incredibly beneficial to small businesses throughout the city. The fact that we're providing that as a free resource, and it's coming from a group like NDC that just has a tremendous amount of expertise in this area, especially working in conjunction with BDC. One last question before I shift back to Shalonda. I know we've got some great questions coming in from our audience. Jennifer, the Design for Distancing program was started really in response to COVID-19, but it also addresses a number of issues related to equality and inclusion, which have been brought up during the Black Lives Matter movement. Can you talk about how your design conversations have changed as a result of that and where you see things going?
Absolutely. The Neighborhood Design Center was founded in 1968 following the first series of uprisings in the United States, specifically to support design equity, to bring investment and community-driven investment to Baltimore City in response to inequities that are designed into our city. And so this is a context in which we've always operated, but are heartened to see that conversation broadened to our entire nation's conversations. That this project inherently is focused on the immediate public health crisis that we're in the midst of, but structural racism is also a public health crisis, and one that has deeply affected our city. And so, we have competing issues at play, and ones that we can't fully understand which things need to be prioritized. Being out in public is going to better protect our immediate protection from COVID-19 right now, as well as, kind of our mental health, going for walks, having access to green spaces. All of that is shown quite specifically to improve our public health. And yet we are becoming increasingly aware that the public realm is often a place of violent and serious lack of safety for people of color in our cities and towns. And so we just need to be quite mindful that when we're encouraging everybody to spend more time out in public, that some people are doing that in places that have serious violence and police issues that put their lives and their livelihoods and their abilities to support their families at risk. When we police our communities, it can have extreme adverse effects on people's mental health and their ability to be economically productive over their entire lifetimes. And so we have to be very careful that we're not, and that we stop oppressing people and destroying their ability to support their families and economically participate in our city and have the health and wellness that I know I'm easily able to achieve in this city.
Thank you, Jennifer. Shalonda, I want to turn it back over to you. I know we got some great questions rolling in from our audience.
We really do. Thank you. Thank you all. This has been very intriguing. And I think from an inspiration point, as I started off, just looking forward to the recovery piece, and this is one way out. I'm actually going to start off with the question that really sort of highlights, and I want to make sure that people know where some of this is happening. The question is, really love the focus on neighborhoods, but what do the panelists see as best immediate areas of opportunity for public space projects in the downtown core? There's a mix of residents and apartment buildings and businesses downtown. What can DPOB in particular do to facilitate these projects for the downtown? I want to start off saying a couple things, and then if you have some things that you want to add as well in here. I think when people say downtown, sometimes they think of downtown as this conglomerate and not downtown being neighborhoods as well. And so in particular, I know that some of these activities with NDC and BDC are taking place in downtown, two in particular within the Downtown Partnership District in Bromo and Market Center. So we do have some that's happening here. The other thing that I know Downtown Partnership is doing in looking at the guidebook and working with other partners to see how we can expand and build on some of those resources in areas where we don't actually have the benefit of that partnership. Additionally, all of the activities and things that we're doing now is to facilitate the economy coming back. What we know is we need to support our small businesses and restaurants. And so that's why you see a number of programs that are coming and happening in that space. There's one that we're talking about that you'll see in August, even on Charles Street, where we're gonna help with those restaurants where they don't have as much of that outdoor space, gonna be able to close down a portion of Charles Street between the 300 and 500 block so that we can do, an outdoor way. It's not a festival, that's the sort of theme of it, but in the spirit of that, what we know. And so there'll be a number of business opportunities and everything coming through. Please continue for anybody to look at our website because we are continuously doing that. Colin and Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything else, particularly within downtown, that's happening as a result of this.
You want to talk about which districts are working in downtown, Colin?
I'll let you take it, Jennifer. You're more
Okay.
the expert. So.
Sure. So I think one of the primary things that support having utilization of public space in our city, there's two things. One is a density of population and daytime and nighttime population. And I think Downtown Partnership is doing a great job of thinking about how to build residents and bring more people that live downtown full time so that we can have that daytime and nighttime vitality between the people who live downtown and the people who work downtown. And then secondarily is really programming. And so I really see Downtown Partnership taking the lead on making sure that things are really happening in the Bromo district. I think like the last summer before we were under current conditions, the night market was incredible, thinking about how to revitalize Lexington market. So it has, not just that indoor presence, but a lot of outdoor activities, thinking about how to host events all summer long in those public spaces under normal conditions is really how people begin to change their habits and have an expectation that being out, that there's going to be something happening, they're going to get to see their friends, and that being outside and in the public realm is fun and exciting in the city. And so, I think that those are the main actions that we're moving towards in normal times. And right now we're just trying to kind of more extend a lifeline and make sure that we can all still, feel connected to one another, but do so safely, as well as just meeting our daily needs.
Which is good. Thank you so much. So more to come. You have something, Colin?
Yeah, just this is sort of off the topic, but while it's in my mind, I might as well say it so I don't forget. But in terms of the economic development piece of design for distancing, there was another important aspect of this that I think NDC and BDC wanted to accomplish, and that was, as we were sort of, as I mentioned, the local makers, where we were supporting them in their craft. We saw this as an opportunity to showcase Baltimore's design talent and really be a leader nationally, potentially internationally, in design. We have an amazing creative class in Baltimore. We have architects, we have landscape architects, we have graphic designers, we have builders. And so this was an opportunity to bring all of them together and kind of showcase their abilities and skills during this crisis. Obviously, we have Micah anchored here as well. And so that was part of our, I think, economic development play too, was to give a space for artists and others to come together and showcase their talents. And that was why the design book, the design guideline book, was so important to what we wanted to do, because we wanted to give a platform to the creative class who've been significantly impacted also during the pandemic. So I wanted to just mention that because I don't think I covered that with the councilman's questions. I forgot, so it's important.
And I think you'll really see that in the implementation phase. I know that most of the design build teams have been extremely productive in leveraging our creative community in those design build teams. And certainly all of our retail business districts are, have individual identities and are very enthusiastic about carrying out those individual identities in the implementation phase. So I think you'll see some of our most creative people out there building on build days.
Which is some good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One more, I'm gonna stay right here, and this is probably, Jennifer, more for you to talk about it, talking about the positivities, how it's a great project, but how are the neighborhoods using the Design for Distancing project to implement more permanent designs in some of the districts?
Sure. So I think this is a I think we can kind of consider it maybe a prototype phase, you know, that there are many ideas that people have thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to try? And yet I don't feel, it feels too risky to invest in that trial phase. And so with this funding from BDC and the expediency in which we're able to implement through city partnership, we now have the opportunity to kind of do a try it out phase with a lot of public space improvements in our small business districts through this program. And I think it'll be really interesting to see which things succeed, which things in terms of public safety over succeed and we need to step back from to keep everybody safe, and which things people are like, we were really curious about that, but actually that's not what anybody wants, or it just doesn't even work. And so it really gives that space right now with the funding and partnership of the BDC to allow small businesses to try things out. And then, you know, next summer and fall, hopefully things will be safer and people can make more permanent investments in those spaces.
Which is good. Thank you. This one, Councilman, I don't know if you know or Colin in here, but it says, while I understand we're in an election year, does the city have any new policies in place to incentivize development after COVID? For example, the high performance tax credit, et cetera. Do you know of anything coming down the pike there?
And defer to Colin for that one.
Sure. There's no new tax credit programs that we're thinking of. I think personally it's probably still a little too early to tell what the impact of the pandemic is going to be on commercial real estate, for example. You know, I think if the recovery is, you know, what we're calling a U or a V, and we come back strong, hopefully by the end of the year, you know, there certainly will be an impact on commercial real estate. Of course, everyone's sort of scratching their head on the office space, what that means. Personally, at this point, I don't think it's going to be as dramatic as people maybe are predicting. But the short answer is I think it's a little too early to tell, but we'll be, of course, watching that closely. And like the high performance market rate tax credit that we worked very closely with Downtown Partnership on, where we saw a market need for residential, we saw an opportunity, but of course we needed the incentive in order to make that investment reality. It's been very successful. We'll be watching sort of the trends of.
And Shalonda, if I can just
it's a little early, I think, for
yeah.
If I could just piggyback off of what Colin said, and of course agree with him 100%. I think one of the encouraging things that we're seeing is, you know, real estate investors are still very bullish on Baltimore and are excited about investing in our city. So despite what's happening with COVID-19 and in other cities across the country, you're seeing real and genuine interest in investment in our city. And I think that's a really positive sign for Baltimore.
Absolutely. I think, and we heard some of that on our last, I know, Downtown Download with that, Councilman. It transitioned to a question that really you've answered it a little bit with it, but it says with office space vacancy rates much higher due to COVID, is there an opportunity for additional residential development in downtown neighborhoods? We know that throughout, we probably have in sort of the downtown overall about 43,000 residents now. So is there an opportunity for additional residential development? You know?
I think the short answer is yes. Obviously, with the conversions, it depends a lot on the building itself and what makes sense. But yeah, I think downtown's population has been growing now for feels like at least a decade, and I think it's going to continue to grow as we move forward with both new construction of residential and potentially some additional conversions of office space.
You know, which is great. This question, I'm not sure if you all know, I have sort of a short answer, if not, but we starting to get this question often about State Center. And if we know the status of the State Center move that was initially going to have some existing office space moving in the CBD, do you hear anything about whether or not the plan has been stalled because of COVID? I've heard some things, didn't know if you did as well.
I do not have the latest update on what the state is doing in terms of relocation. No, sorry.
Yeah, I know in
Yeah,
where
the
you say,
state's, just going to second what Colin said, the state's been really quiet about that, but I know we do have incredible opportunities in downtown.
no, right. And I think like everybody from the internal conversations that we've had, it's that just as everybody sort of goes through COVID and figures out the impact of what's happening, it's hard to make and commit to any, sort of timeline of when things are going to happen. And so, to that question, it says, has it been stalled because of COVID? I think that's probably a fair assessment of where things are right now. And I have one more question. This one, Colin, goes back to you. We're going to close out with this one. It's more of a high level, but they started off early, excited about the grant program. Part of the question, and I think this is something we've gotten overall, not necessarily happening in Baltimore, but there was a concern around how larger companies with more resources were able to access some of the early PPP funds and some of those things on a larger scale. Any insight into how or why? I know in Baltimore's response, you tried to take that into account, but was there any other understanding that you guys had there?
Yeah, I think in particular with the PPP program, I think a lot of small businesses did not have readily available the financial information that was required, and some did and some didn't. So, like for example, if you had a payroll, if your company was large enough to have a payroll provider, similar to like an ADP or another company, they actually produced a lot of the information that the federal government needed. And so it was very easy for those businesses to access. If you were a mom and pop and you didn't have that, you just did payroll yourself, you didn't have access to those, that resource. And so those were the businesses I think that struggled. So it was a scale issue because I think the businesses that were larger basically just had documentation that was ready, whereas a lot of small businesses were scrambling, didn't quite have everything put together, and in some cases weren't sure what to do. And so it was interesting to kind of see everyone's individual. So you have sort of different responses to the crisis. Some of the entrepreneurs went and were like, oh, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to get my PPP and got into the weeds and got everything together. And then others, I think, were just so overwhelmed with the pandemic and the crisis and what it might mean for them, both personally, to their family, financially, to their employees, that it was just overwhelming. And so I actually tried to do a little matchmaking there where you got to try to help, some businesses that have been through the process help other businesses get there. But that was why the technical assistant network was so important, because we had access to lawyers, we had access to accountants to help some of the smaller businesses that didn't have those resources readily available. But I think that was really the main reason why you saw larger companies succeed while smaller companies were sort of unable to do so as quickly.
No, thank you so much, Colin, Jennifer, and Councilman. Great job, Councilman. Did you have anything? We're going to close out. Anything else you wanted to say before we close out?
Yes, unfortunately, Colin and Jennifer, thank you so much. And thank you for your partnership with the city and with Downtown Partnership. We did get one question, 15-second response. Max Grinnell, who's I believe, an urban professor in Boston and Chicago. He doesn't live here, but he said, this is one of the better urban Zoomers I've been on. It feels honest. Will John Waters be showing up? The answer is no. But we do have some very, very exciting upcoming episodes. We're growing strong. We're continuing to move forward. Next week, we're going to have some local law firms come on and talk about how they've been responding to the pandemic, how they've been advising their clients in the context of COVID-19. I just want to thank our audience for continuing to show up and be engaged. And thank you, Shalonda, for your partnership and for your entire team at DPOB.
No, thank you. Really appreciate it. I want to do a special shout out, as you did, Councilman, to the attendees for staying on with us today, to my amazing team at Downtown Partnership, who make it look seamlessly and make us look good throughout the process. I want to thank my board chair, Mark Wasserman, who I see is on. And we also have one of our new executive committee members, Analea Shimonik, is also on. So thank you all for tuning in. As I mentioned some of the things earlier in the show, please, Downtown Partnership is activating a number of the public spaces. Visit our website to see how you can take part. Please support the restaurants with the Parklet over the next few weeks. You'll see that schedule. All of our social handles and where to find us is on the screen. Go downtownbaltimore.com. And until next week, you all have a good evening, a good day. I'm already calling it tonight. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.